Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe to the channel for regular content on ancient architecture, as well as all the latest news from the world of archaeology. Gobekli Tepe and all of the pre-pottery Neolithic sites in the Fertile Crescent have captivated us with their architecture. The monumental buildings, the enigmatic T-shaped pillars, the incredible statues and material culture. But, if truth be told, it's the art and decoration that's really blown us away. Whether it's the relief carvings on the megalithic pillars and stone benches, or the tiny etchings on the more portable artefacts, many researchers have put their minds into the work, and it's no surprise there are dozens of conflicting interpretations. There's no consensus as to what the ancients were depicting, and that's because there's a lack of context. We're talking of a culture 10 to 12,000 years old, far older than the ancient Egyptians and Sumerians. There's no writing, there's no knowledge of their beliefs, rites and rituals. We don't know what was important to these people and what made them tick. But whatever its meaning, the art is just incredible. It's skillful and intricate work, and as we can see on the bench of the oval building at Sayburch, there is also a narrative. There is real meaning. But before we can apply any meaning to any of the art on display, we have to identify what is being portrayed. This is clearly a statue of a human. This is clearly a vulture. But what's this? Could it be an egg? Is it a decapitated head? Is it the sun or moon or something else? The fact is, we don't know, and if we in the modern era wrongly identify this object, well, the scene on the pillar can easily become something it's not. And what if there is already a consensus about the identity of some of the iconography, and the consensus has got it wrong? Then everybody, experts and independent researchers, will forever be looking in the wrong place for answers. That's what I feel about arguably the most important animal on display on the T-pillars, statues and portable art seen across the pre-pottery Neolithic sites of Turkey and Syria. It's the so-called snake. We see it on so many of the T-pillars of Gobekli Tepe, an animal with a clear serpentine body and bulbous head, sometimes solitary and sometimes grouped with others. Sometimes they're long and sometimes they're short. There has been little doubt amongst researchers that these animals are snakes, and this identification leads people to look at snake symbolism in later cultures, to try and make meaningful connections across time. But I have to say, I really don't think we're looking at snakes at all. We automatically think snake because they're so prominent in other later cultures. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt had snakes on their headdresses, there was a snake in the Garden of Eden, to the Sumerians the snake was a symbol of healing, and in Chinese mythology, a woman-headed snake made the first humans, one at a time with clay. Snakes can be found as guardian of the underworld, or messengers between the upper and lower worlds. In Nordic myth, evil was symbolised by the serpent, and the list goes on and on. Snakes were certainly important to many ancient cultures around the world, and so we see these creatures depicted in the pre-pottery Neolithic, and whether you're an expert or a layperson, you often think snake. And that's a real problem, because we're using our own preconceptions without any real basis. The pre-pottery Neolithic culture across Turkey, Syria and the Near East came thousands and thousands of years before Sumer and ancient Egypt, and thousands of years before the Old Testament was penned. There is no evidence of domestication of animals or farming as yet. The people of this ancient time were certainly hunters, and this is a fundamental difference to the civilizations that came later. In truth, there is no real reason to link our knowledge of known ancient history, mythology and religion with this truly ancient prehistoric culture. As far as I'm aware, only one person has looked at the so-called snake iconography truly objectively, and that is Professor Dragoş Gheorghiu, and his work has been buried in academic literature for more than a decade. Regarding the serpentine creatures of Göbekli Tepe, Gheorghiu says, quote, "When they are depicted on the narrow frontal face of the pillars, these snake-like creatures are represented solitary or in groups of 3 to 5 individuals, positioned to move in a downward direction in a wave pattern." End quote. He thinks the different lengths of the bodies and also the different shaped heads illustrate different species, and he believes the creatures are not snakes at all, but are in fact types of slender fish, and such fish would have been common in this part of the world in the pre-pottery Neolithic. These include the Mesopotamian catfish, the Mesopotamian spiny eel, the European eel, and more. And after reading his papers, this to me makes so much sense when you look at the overall iconography displayed on the pillars. I made a full and in-depth video about this in July 2024 in a video titled Cracking the Gobekli Tepe Code. Before I go further, this video is sponsored by another incredible book from Hungry Minds, an international team of artists, scientists, architects, designers and more, who previously released the 400-page masterpiece The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization. This time it's the last book, a hybrid of personal diary and encyclopedia, fiction and non-fiction, as it tells the story of Noah Kaplan, the last surviving Earthling who escapes the planet's destruction aboard an alien ship. Yes, it was aliens. This book is fantastic, weaving a fictional sci-fi story with real knowledge, as Noah decides to write down everything remarkable about humanity, from our greatest achievements to the smallest, most beautiful details about life on Earth. And it is a masterpiece. You feel Noah's emotion and you also learn something. The book is like a tribute to humanity. To come to market, the book was successfully funded on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, a collaborative effort of more than 50 professionals, as they've carefully and cleverly fused narrative fiction with factual detail, something you very rarely see. How many educational books have an emotional side to them as well? But I have to say, as I opened the huge box it came in, this really is more than a book. It's a keepsake. When you open it, it feels like you've received something very special. It's got that X-Factor appeal. A beautiful hardback cover, amazing original illustrations, high quality paper and print, and it would make for a totally unique and premium gift. Books from Hungry Minds really are a treasure, and after finishing this one, I have to say it's my favourite so far. A genius idea, and now my son is also loving it as well. You can get your copy by clicking the link in the pinned comment or description below and use promo code ARCHITECTSLASTBOOK for 10% off. And now back to the video. After everything I've read on the subject, Professor Gheorghiu offers the best and most realistic explanation for the iconography on the pillars of Gobekli Tepe, because he's the only person who has, in my opinion, interpreted these animals correctly. If you call these snakes, the amazing iconography on Pillar 33 makes no logical sense at all. Finding multiple snakes around the legs of wetland birds isn't something you see in nature. But if these snakes are actually fish, then multiple fish around the legs of wetland birds gives us a wetland setting, and according to Gheorghiu's interpretation, that the band on the narrow front of the pillar depicts a river or a stream, well, then we get even more clarity. In 2004, Klaus Schmidt and Joris Peters released a paper on animals at Gobekli Tepe, and they mention how a bone from a Mesopotamian catfish was discovered at the site, but there was nothing from a snake. and although fish remains are few and far between, their importance is probably not about them being a source of food, but the knock-on effect to the wider natural world. Congregations of fish, especially for spring spawning, would bring about the cranes and waterbirds, which were much better meal options for hunter settlements. The spawning fish symbolised the rebirth of the natural world. It was Gheorghiu's opinion that many of the animal arrangements on the pillars are actually showing ecosystems, like the ancient people were depicting the natural world around them at specific times of the year. And these people hunted their food, so of course it makes sense they would have an acute understanding of the landscape around them. For example, take Building D at Gobekli Tepe. We have 11 pillars on the perimeter, and the animals displayed would have all been local to the area. The fox, the jackal, the leopard, equids, wild boar, aurochs, gazelle, mouflon, crane, and so on. Specifically, they were all animals seen in the marshlands of the Euphrates. As Gheorghiu discovered, by relating the animals on display to their specific ecosystem, one can interpret Gobekli Tepe's iconography as an indexical visual strategy to present the local landscape. In 2004, Klaus Schmidt and Joris Peters did offer a similar explanation, but identifying the serpentine-like creature as a snake was a big issue, because it's not a realistic natural visual, because having dozens of snakes slithering round the legs of waterbirds is not realistic. You don't see that in the natural world. It only makes sense when these animals are in fact slender fish, and therefore we do get an accurate portrayal of the local landscape around Gobekli Tepe in the pre-pottery Neolithic. In the spring months, you do find dense congregations of fish in rivers, streams and lakes, but you don't see this with snakes, especially in what seems to have been a wetland environment. Writing in 2023, Gheorghiu again wrote that the so-called snakes we see on the pillars of Gobekli Tepe are more likely to be a variety of fish. The long-bodied versions could be the Mesopotamian spiny eel, and the short-bodied ones could be the Mesopotamian catfish. Again, please watch my previous video on the subject, as well as the two papers by Professor Gheorghiu I've linked below in the description. Identifying eels and catfish on the pillars gives the iconography a real natural context, but nature certainly had a deeper connection with these people. And this brings us to a more taboo subject, shamanism, which is often a practical application of animism, the belief that all things have a spirit, emphasising a deep connection with nature and the interconnectedness of all life. We move from a practical look at iconography to the unknown rites, rituals and beliefs, and it is a near-on impossible subject to cover. But it's something we do have to consider because there is a narrative to much of the iconography on display. The famous scene on the bench of Sayburch is now iconic, but this isn't an ecosystem or a landscape, it's saying something very specific. It's a narrative, it's telling us something. Excavations in the southern Levant have revealed a shaman presence in the Natufian culture, which came just before the pre-pottery Neolithic, and we also have the famous Natufian grave of a female, identified as a shaman. She's surrounded by parts of different animals. There's a skull from a marten, a tail of an aurochs, a wing bone from an eagle, the carapace of a tortoise, and so on. The specific body parts chosen must have been symbolic. They must have had a deeper meaning. For example, the tail of an aurochs could be a symbol of the animal's aggressiveness, because, as stated by Professor Gheorghiu, prehistoric iconography and contemporary images of bison and African bullfighting shows the animals with raised tails. Maybe this man on the Sayburch bench is holding the tail of an aurochs as he faces the beast, maybe symbolising his own power over the animal, and by default over the entire animal kingdom. In the pre-pottery Neolithic, we also find life-size masks in the southern Levant, as well as miniature stone masks made from limestone at Gobekli Tepe. From these objects you could infer shamanic practices. And then look at some of the composite statues. They're like prehistoric totem poles where human and animal iconography merge together into one. The meaning of such composite statues could well be related to their shamanistic belief system. And it could also be the purpose and meaning for the decoration in the special purpose buildings. When I stood inside the replica Building D in Llanfair Museum in October this year, I couldn't believe the size of it. Compared to when you look down on the excavation site, when inside it does feel so much bigger. When I visited earlier this year, I had the ideas of Professor Gheorghiu in mind. I imagined the pillars painted, just like we see with the painted boar that was discovered a few years ago, and also a roof covering the building, and maybe flickering flames making the animal reliefs come to life. When you imagine the central narrow band on the pillars being rivers or streams, it gives the appearance of fish swimming down into the buildings, and it made me think just how important fish must have been symbolically. And what is that? Well, fish congregations and rivers and streams start a chain reaction in the animal kingdom. For a start, the fish themselves can be caught, but most importantly, they bring out more animals like waterbirds, which in turn bring out more animals like leopards and jackals, which in turn bring out scavengers like vultures. It's like the rebirth of the natural world, but it all starts with the fish. On leaving the replica Building D inside the museum, I walked around to the exhibit on the Vali Chori and came across the famous human head with the so-called snake. But again, I don't think that this is a snake. I think it's another slender fish, and the same with this composite statue from Gobekli Tepe. On the lower half we see two of these slender fish, and they meet at the navel of the human just below the hands, and the person may well be giving birth. And now let's look at the famous Kalisic sculpture, a bizarre creation, but it could be another statue of a human giving birth, as believed by some scholars. But recently, I've looked at pictures again. I think the sculptor has actually encoded the slender fish into it. The head of the statue always looks so strange, like it's an alien from the Alien film franchise, or an old man losing his hair. But I now think we're looking at some kind of human-fish hybrid statue, where the human arm and his possible belt double up as the wavy body of a fish, and the fish head is the back of the human head. The more I'm looking into objects and structures from the pre-pottery Neolithic, the more prominent the fish symbol actually is. And at the Syrian site of Tel Caramel, actual catfish or eel sculptures have been found. Previously, experts would say they're all snakes, but I believe that this is a case of mistaken identity. Congregations of fish trigger the arrival of animal biodiversity into the local landscape, and fish are also predictable in that they have a spawning cycle. The spawning of each type of fish is based on their preferred water temperature, and in the modern era, knowing when and where fish spawn does make for easier fishing. And what other phenomena help with fish spawning? Well, interestingly, when the desired temperature lines up with a full or new moon cycle, some fish go into overdrive and start spawning heavily. I have a friend who fishes, and he says you'll always catch more catfish during a full moon, and that's because the small fish they feed on act differently at this time. My fishing knowledge is extremely limited, but knowing that moon phases affect fish behaviour makes me wonder if the circle on Pillar 43 is actually depicting the moon, with the ancients knowing its very real effect on the natural world. And is this statue from Karahan Tepe looking up at the moon? Temperature also affects fish behaviour. Cool mornings might push fish to deeper waters, but warmer afternoons might bring them to spawning spots. I'm sure 10 to 12,000 years ago, humans would have understood the natural world enough to know where to find the fish, and hence where the biodiversity would congregate. They would have understood how the moon and the temperature affected the fish, and hence their very real effects on their lives. For the hunter, the fish start everything moving for a new year of hunting and food consumption, and different fish spawn at different times and locations in the year, another important fact the ancients would have known. You only survive and flourish in a pre-Neolithic era when you have a keen understanding of the natural world around you, and so the importance of fish can't be underestimated. That's why I believe that people associated themselves with fish in art and why they're so prominent on architecture. It's shamanistic symbolism. Now, the idea that people of Göbekli Tepe associated themselves with snakes does sound quite cool. It's powerful and strong due to the nature of the beast, but in their day-to-day life, a snake would not be all that important to their existence. Being associated with fish does sound less exciting, but spawning fish, especially at a full moon, would start off a magical time in nature, as animals of all kinds re-emerge, from waterbirds and aurochs to vultures and foxes. They all head towards the wetland regions, and food is plentiful in the land once again, and it all starts with the fish. Maybe the fish was held sacred, and the reason we don't find many fish bones at Göbekli Tepe is simply because the fish were to be left alone, because it's the fish that bring the abundance and variety of animals into the landscape. Maybe that's why fish feature inside special buildings, why humans associated themselves with the fish, and also why they feature on composite statues showing humans giving birth. For many cultures, fish have always been fertility symbols, often due to their prolific reproductive abilities producing countless eggs, and they've also been associated with abundance, prosperity, and new life. Some people eat fish heads at the Jewish New Year because this symbolises new beginnings, and before eating it is said, "May we be heads not tails," meaning leaders not followers. Apparently they're a symbol of prosperity, and some people eat fish to symbolise multiplying like fish. In Bengali weddings, a decorated fish is gifted to the bride, and this represents fertility and prosperity. In ancient Egypt, the fish was sacred and associated with the goddess Hathor, the goddess of motherhood, and the fish was always a symbol of fertility, rebirth, and new life in Egyptian art. There are dozens of examples of important fish symbolism in ancient and modern cultures because the fish was so important to early civilization. If one year there was a lack of fish in the rivers and streams, it would lead to less animals in the landscape, less biodiversity, which is bad fortune, less prosperity, and life that year would be a real struggle. And it seems this was known to many cultures. When we recognise that the so-called snake symbolism of Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe and Sayburç was actually showing types of fish, things finally start to make sense. It gives everything some context. And so 10 to 12,000 years ago, we could well be seeing the first known fish fertility prosperity symbolism in human history, something that would linger for thousands of years. Because fish are so important in nature. They represented rebirth, and they represented the start of a new year of food and prosperity for hunters. Like Gheorghiu believes, I imagine shamanistic practices taking place in the communal special buildings, and with the fish symbolically swimming down the edges of the pillars into the structures, bringing all the animals with them. I imagine rites, rituals and practices taking place before the spawning season begins, with a focus on this sacred animal of the waters. I already have so much more I could add to this video, so many more supporting ideas and observations, so if you'd like a part 2, please comment below, and together we'll try and make sense of our ancient ancestors. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.